Thank you very much, Larry. It's my honor to introduce our closing speaker today, Ambassador Mark Brzezinski, currently the Executive Director of the United States Arctic Executive Steering Committee in the White House. We, people of the North, could ask for no better person to serve in this important role in our federal government. A role that brings together the family of federal agencies with responsibilities ranging from security to commerce to transportation to research, the environment, and just about everything in between. So that these agencies' important work in Alaska and in the Arctic is coordinated with our state, with Alaska Native communities, the private sector, nonprofits, and the international community. All of this to develop innovative solutions to our many complex challenges and creative approaches to our many exciting opportunities. Ambassador Brzezinski comes from a long line of distinguished statesmen and diplomats in the United States, Poland, and the former Czechoslovakia. By his service to our country as ambassador to Sweden, a staff member of the National Security Council, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and a practicing attorney, he is making in his own right a great contribution to the interests of the United States, and especially to those of us living and working here in the North. He is a steadfast supporter of the University of Alaska and has visited with us many times. And he has ensured that the voices of the Arctic are heard at the highest levels of our government. Educated at Dartmouth College, the University of Virginia, and Oxford University, it is clear the ambassador places a high personal and professional priority on education and research, as do we all here this afternoon. So I ask you all to give a warm welcome to Ambassador Mark Brzezinski.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, International Arctic Assembly. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very special moment on the Arctic. The Arctic issue, of course, is ascending in the scientific community, but it's also ascending in the mainstream media and in the public understanding, in the policy and think tank community, and in government circles here in America and around the world. And the timing of this could not be more urgent. As President Obama put it after he visited Alaska's Arctic in September, the looming crisis in Alaska's Arctic is a tangible preview of the looming crisis of the global condition. And your program today at the International Arctic Assembly has an essential piece to it that will determine how well we do in the future or not. I'm talking about your focus today on the relationship between science and policy, on the way scientific research impacts, informs, and is manifested in the policy-making process. The Arctic is changing. A lot of science needs to be done to clarify exactly what is happening and its impact. But equally important, much needs to be done to translate science and research into policy and practice. I can't think of a more timely and appropriate focus. Too many times in the past, one can point to a tragic dissonance between science and policy. I sincerely hope the meeting today creates a platform for dealing with the future that others can share in and join in this regard. While the Arctic is a foreshadow, an augury of things to come, it is also an opening for a collective response, and if informed by science, an effective response. I am pleased to report to you that the Obama administration has really stepped up the government's game on the Arctic, with the starting point being science. I am proud to join an incredible team of U.S. government colleagues as part of Team Arctic within the Obama administration. Alaska's very own Fran Ulmer, chair of the Arctic Research Commission, former U.S. Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Bob Papp, the State Department's special representative, Dave Kennedy from NOAA, Joel Clement, DOI, Martin Jeffries from the White House, Dave Bolton and Julie Gurley from State, many others. It is a team effort in the U.S. government to advance the U.S. interest in the Arctic. And we all work for a president for whom great science knows no borders, and for whom undertaking investment in Arctic science is key. The 2017 budget proposal, just rolled out by the executive branch, literally has a photo of Mount Denali on its cover, only the second time in history that there's ever been a photo on the cover of the federal budget. But more importantly, on the pages in between, there is a national imperative on the Arctic. And there is a continuing commitment to undertake investment in Arctic science. Sustainable stewardship of the Arctic requires strong investments in research and development in the natural sciences to strengthen the scientific basis for decision-making. The budget provides significant support for Arctic research programs. It also advances the objectives of the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, IARPC's Arctic Research Plan, which is devoted to advancing scientific cooperation between agencies of the federal government and international engagement through our ongoing U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council. Getting agencies to work together is key. Supporting programs like the Fulbright Arctic Initiative, led by Professor Ross Virginia and Dr. Mike Sfraga, is key. Thinking through the development of an Arctic observing system with stable, long-term funding to link the capabilities of all nations is key. Moving decisions pertaining to the Arctic through U.S. government agencies and through the interagency process is why President Obama took the unique step last year by executive order to create an Arctic Executive Steering Committee in the White House. He created the Arctic Executive Steering Committee to set priorities and to move those priorities forward. He placed the Arctic Executive Committee in the White House not under the National Security Council, which he could have, nor under the National Economic Council, which he could have, but under the Office of Science and Technology Policy and chaired by the President's science advisor, Dr. John Holdren, because science is the starting point of how we want to engage on all the challenges and opportunity of the Arctic. This administration is light years ahead of where we were in the past, and the Arctic is no longer an extraneous or esoteric issue, but an important focus. Last week, the White House rolled out a new implementation plan report for our national strategy for the Arctic region, and it reflects that the administration is doing a better job in organizing efforts and in marshaling resources. In this way, we are better positioned to work with other nations around the world. A case in point was seen last week during the state visit to Washington, D.C. of the new Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. In the lead-up to that visit, we seized the opportunity to work with our Canadian counterparts to create a checklist that provides a comparison of undertakings in order to clarify compatibility between the U.S. and Canada on the Arctic and go after things that we can expand jointly. The result was a U.S.-Canada joint statement on the Arctic, a first, which addresses, first, conserving Arctic biodiversity through science-based decision-making. Second, incorporating indigenous science and traditional knowledge into decision-making. Third, building a stable and sustainable Arctic economy. And fourth, supporting strong Arctic communities. We call on all Arctic nations and those with Arctic interests to consider these principles. After all, the Arctic is an interdependent reality in that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. As we think about our shared Arctic, as we think about a joint response and a common future, I want to zero in on something President Obama highlighted in the Rose Garden at the White House last week. Later this year, in the fall, we will host a White House Arctic Science Ministerial. What is it that we want to accomplish? We will convene an international gathering of science ministers to advance promising near-term initiatives and to create the context for increased scientific collaboration on the Arctic over the longer term. An important point is this. As we develop this ministerial and the deliverables that underpin it, we absolutely recognize that the Arctic space is a treasure shared by the world. To make an Arctic Science Ministerial successful, we have to incorporate all the ideas, not just from the Arctic countries, but from nations around the world that have a stake in the future of the Arctic. When it comes to Arctic science, the absence of shared efforts only accelerates a worse outcome. It will take everyone to think through what is scientifically the most urgent because of the negative consequences of inaction. That is the way we are going to be able to handle as one world our common Arctic challenge. The goal of the White House Arctic Science Ministerial is to advance effective cooperation. After all, we all share the same self-interest in the future of the Arctic. That is our children and our children's children and the kind of world they will inherit. So let me congratulate the International Arctic Assembly and pledge to you that the Obama administration will do all it can to lift up Arctic science and to advance international combinations to support it. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today.